Hey everybody, welcome to the First Monday Show for February 2021. This is a tabletop gaming vlog where we talk about the tabletop gaming hobby and topics of interest for tabletop gamers. Come on back for a talk about trends in the hobby, what we can look for from 2021, and some games that are going to match those trends. Come on back after the break. Our hobby has always been influenced by many gaming trends, and if you follow the way that games always come out every single year, you start seeing some various gaming trends. You can go all the way back to 2008. Why 2008? Because 12 seemed like a magical number right now. But back in 2008, we were introduced to Dominion, which created a whole series of different deck building games. You go up to 2012, which pretty much brought out the micro games. You had games such as Love Letter, you had the Tiny Epic series, and a whole bunch of games that are all about bringing as much gameplay into the smallest package possible. Heck, Love Letter had just barely a little more than a dozen cards in it, but it's a game that we're still playing to this day. 2016, the mighty Sleeping Beast Games Workshop finally woke up, and we started seeing the influences of 2016 with Games Workshop bringing out games that were bringing pretty much the miniatures hobby and the board gaming hobby and kind of marrying them together. Now you can kind of say that Games Workshop is a kind of cheap pick, but I was going with 4 years every single time, so just work with me because I know that Games Workshop actually kind of woke up in 2014. If you look at the Assassinorum Execution Force game, but let's just pretend that I'm picking some really cool numbers and just work with me right here. Following up on that trend, we had 2020. 2020 was the year of games where we started seeing a lot of an emergence of solo gaming and cooperative gaming. Well, because cooperative gaming is pretty much solo gaming. There are so many games that are cooperative that you can play solo, and there's also some good solo games. And 2020 was really where the market really started doing a major shift from competitive games, and we started seeing a lot of solo and cooperative games coming out. Matter of fact, if you head over to Board Game Geek, you can actually see a full geek list that's actually full of tons and tons of games that were just modified by players, modified by producers, modified by publishers, or even game designers, helping you to enjoy their fantastic games in more of a solo atmosphere, because 2020 was a year where all of our group gaming was pretty much put on a big old hold. Now, last month, if you checked out my video, you see that I talked actually about some of the amazing amount of trends that were actually in 2020 with some of the Kickstarters. You saw one of the highest grossing Kickstarter games in 2020 was actually a solo or a cooperative game, and that's going to be Frosthaven. Frosthaven made well over $10 million. I think it made 12 point some insanely large millions of dollars amount of money, which is definitely worth it, because Frosthaven, or even Gloomhaven, which is actually based on, is a fantastic game. It's a wonderful hybridization of classic Euro style gameplay with very much thematic American gameplay. You're bringing out a game that matches theme and very good Euro style mechanics to create a game that is very, very enjoyable. Now, I'm not going to lie here, it's one of those games that I have my own personal homebrew rule for, but that's just because there's one rule in the game that really breaks the theme for me, and I'll talk about it one of these days when I review Frosthaven, because I'm definitely going to review that game on the channel. Now, we saw other games along the same theme come out last year. There was also Frostpunk, which was also a solo or cooperative style game, telling a story when the frozen winterland, and well, I think we're starting to see a frost theme, because we even had D&D come out with the Rime of the Frost Maiden, which was also another frozen winter wonderland. So I think we saw a theme in 2020 besides cooperative game. Everybody just wanted to see everything freeze. Don't know why. Well, that's enough about 2020. Let's go ahead and talk about 2021 and some of the games that have bbeen announced and see where things are going here pretty darn quickly. First up on the list is going to be Concordia. Now, if you're not familiar with Concordia, Concordia is a game from Mac Gertz. It's basically a 2 to 5 player strategic economical game that has a lot of variety and so much in the game that there's no way I can give it great justice in about 10 seconds. Just understand this is a game that plays very well competitively from 2 to 5 players. It's a game that uses cards, it uses a board, it uses economic development, and the players can play on different maps. All these different maps can create different challenges and different ways to play the game. In a way, to me, it's kind of reminds me of Railways of the World, which is another game that the amount of variety comes in the fact that there's just so many darn maps for the game, which adds so much variety and gameplay to the game, which makes it such a fantastic game. So what's the cool thing going on here? Well, they announced Concordia Solitaria, which allows you to start playing Concordia in a solitaire mode. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to add a deck of cards. And I think you have to use a random die to make a little bit of a randomizer, if I'm not mistaken. But what this is going to do is going to allow you to play classic Concordia as a solo game Not only that, and I don't know if this has been official, but if you follow the chat and the blogs and everything like that, you see that this possibly, don't quote me on this one because I'm not Matt Gertz or the designer, but my understanding is not only can you play this solo, you can actually play this 2-player versus this AI as a 3rd player, making it a game where you can still play a 3-player style game, making this a great game for couples still, where you can add in that 3rd AI player, adding to the variety and amount of gameplay of the game. Now, Matt Gertz, we all know, is a fantastic designer. Concordia is a really well-regarded game. The game has been out since, I think, 2013 or 2014. So you're seeing a game that's almost 7 years or maybe more than 7 years old at this point that is still greatly played, greatly respected, still has a lot of expansions, and one more expansion from 2020 that's going to turn this competitive game into a maybe 2-player cooperative versus a AI, or just a purely solo experience so you can keep enjoying this game all the way through 2021 and 2020's tail end into 2021 to enjoy this really fantastic game. Next up on the list, we have Wildlands, The Ancients. Now, Wildlands, if you're not familiar with it, Wildlands, spoiler alert, is a game that's on my top 51 games of all time. It is a really phenomenal game from Martin Wallace, which is basically a competitive game where each player is going to control a small little, I like to use the term army. I know it's not the proper term, but remember, I'm an old Games Workshop player. I've been playing Games Workshop since the 80s, so I'm going to call it an army. I don't care if it's 4 or 5 people or 500. It's your team, it's your army. But basically in Wildlands, what you're doing is you're controlling your group, army, team, whatever, and you're trying to go across a map versus other players. Now, the interesting thing about Wildlands is this is card-based gameplay where the cards in your hand allow you to activate your units. And one extra really cool amount of gameplay that this game adds in that elevates it beyond games of this style is the fact that players can interrupt other players' turns, which adds another layer of mechanics to this game as you're trying to win the game by basically getting victory points. You get victory points in a couple different ways. First person to get their victory points is going to be the grand winner of the game. But Wildlands is a really phenomenal game. It's a game that's awesome because it has multiple different armies. Sorry, I'm going to stick with that term. I'm an old grognard. Just yell at me, leave comments below. I'll go ahead and just listen to them because I can take it. But it's a game where you have different little armies, different maps, different ways to play the game, and it plays the standard game all the way from 2 to 4 players. What Wildlands Ancients does is it turns the game from a 2 to 4 player game into a 1 to 6 player game. And there's the magic number because it adds a 1-player mechanic to the game, because now you can play this game solo through a different kind of mechanics, which allows you to interact with various different maps versus multiple different AIs in the game, because it's the Ancients plural, because you can fight against all these different Ancients to play this game as a purely solo game. Now, Wildlands, The Ancients is basically a new big box expansion. Now, it's not quite as big as the base box. I mean, square-wise, it's about as big. Not quite as thick, but it's going to do things like adding more maps, more variety, and the ability to play this game as a 2-player cooperative versus an AI, a solo game as an AI, a team game all the way up to 6 players, meaning that you just have so much more replay variety, because the Ancients now can be a new team, which means now I believe we're up to 7 total factions for the game. Don't quote me on that one, or go ahead and quote me, go ahead and make fun of me if I get it wrong, but I think that means we are up to 7 total factions for the game. I think this is going to put us up to either 6 or 8 maps, going off of total memory here. Maybe I should have took better notes. Oh wait, I don't take notes. That's the worst part about this. But anyways, Wildlands The Ancients is going to add a lot more variety to the game, and not only that, it's coming out pretty darn soon. I believe on the 18th of February, this is actually going to start shipping, or it should actually be at people's doors now. So Wildlands is a game you want. Wildlands is a game you enjoy. You may want to head over to the website, pre-order this game, because I can guarantee this is going to add a lot of variety to a really fantastic game. Now, if you've been around the channel for a while, you know that I am a very large fan of Portal Games. Matter of fact, Portal Games makes one game that is actually my top 10 games of all time. And if you're not familiar with that game, it's Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe is probably one of my favorite cooperative and solo games that I think has ever been designed. It's a brilliant game with brilliant mechanics, but we're not talking about Robinson Crusoe right here. What we're actually going to be talking about here is the game of Dune and the detective universe. Aha, it's another opportunity for us to play a solo or a cooperative game with other players. What Portal Games has done is they've taken the classic gameplay of the detective series and they married it with the Dune license. Now, if you're not familiar with Dune, well, you know, where have you been for the past many, many years? Because Dune is a very popular license that is actually just opened into the vast marketplace. If you're not familiar with Dune itself, Dune was actually very much locked down very, very thoroughly for many, many years A lot of fans wanted more games in the Dune universe. Unfortunately, people control the license weren't being too free with that license, so it was a license that a lot of people couldn't enjoy. Well, that is changing, as we're starting to see a lot of different companies bringing out different varieties of Dune, and Portal is no different. In Dune House Secrets, coming out in 2021, basically all the players will be playing as rebels who are trying to work together to explore the planet using the mechanics from the Detective series of games. Now, this is going to play for 1 to 4 player. It is based on the Detective series of games, but it's marrying a very classic license to a very solid gameplay. Heck, we've already had multiple versions of Detective, and this is just one more version of Detective in a universe and a theme that is going to attract a lot of players to Detective who may have never played Detective or possibly didn't enjoy Detective because they didn't like the crime drama style gameplay. I'm not one of those people. I love crime drama, but for the people who don't like that, maybe Dune House Secrets may be a game you want to look into. Next up is an extremely huge announcement from GMT Games. GMT Games has just announced a new division that they're calling GMT1, where they're making a full wing or subsection, whatever you want to call, but basically GMT is going to start focusing on solitaire games. Now, solitaire games are not something that's actually unique to GMT Games. They do actually have games that follow the solitaire series. But what the interesting thing is right now is that GMT has actually announced that they now have a full in-house development studio that's going to be purely dedicated to enabling solitaire gamers to enjoy our wide, wonderful hobby. And they are starting to work on games that are specifically for the solitaire gamer. Now, GMT Games sent out a full email, and they also have a big publication about this on their website where you can go check it out. But it goes into talking about some of the ideas and some of the things they're going to start doing with the new GMT1 label. The first things they've announced so far, and this is just so far what they've announced, I'm sure they're going to be announcing some more things very, very quickly, is they're going to be the first game of Prime Minister, and the second game that I know of is going to be called In the Shadows. Now, these are just the start of a brand new wing, a new subdivision, in-house design team for GMT Games. But again, these are some great solitaire games to start enjoying our solitaire hobby throughout 2021. Next up, surprising absolutely nobody, is that Games Workshop is going to be coming out with another Warhammer Quest franchise. Now, I know a lot of people wanted Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. When they announced the end of life for the Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress, a lot of people were disappointed. Well, there are a lot of us who are saying, don't worry everybody, they're discontinuing Blackstone Fortress because they're going to come out with another thematic story because they reached the end of that storyline, and big surprise, we now have Warhammer Quest Cursed City, which is going back to the fantasy roots, which not a surprise for any of us. We all pretty much saw this coming, but this is not meaning that this is a disappointment because this is something we all really wanted. Warhammer Quest has been a fantastic series of games. It's been great all the way from the 80s. It was a wonderful reincarnation when we had Silver Tower. It was a fantastic follow-up. Notice I'm bypassing something here in a second. But it was a wonderful, fantastic follow-up when we had Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. Again, I skipped something. I did it on purpose. And then finally, we're going to start moving into this new thing, which is Warhammer Quest Cursed City. Now, not too many things have been announced about the Cursed City, except for the fact that we know it's going to be back in the fantasy world, and it's the Age of Sigmar fantasy world is what it looks like. So far, they managed to announce one hero, which is going to be a gun-toting witch hunter. They've mentioned a couple different villains, and we see that this is going to be an opportunity for us to fully explore the Cursed City itself. Now, I can make a whole bunch of assumptions about how this is going to be laid out, and I'll probably get some of them right. I probably get some of them wrong, but basically what it looks like to me is this is going to be a hub-based system where the player is going to go into these various different hubs, and every one of these individual hubs is going to continue to tell the storyline. And I imagine some of these hubs are going to be a little, possibly multi-level dungeons, like maybe 1 or 2 levels per dungeon. And you're going to go through all these hubs telling various different stories. And basically what I'm saying is they're going to take all the positive mechanics that worked in Blackstone Fortress. We saw some of the expansions that were able to be replayed because they're a little bit variable every time you play through them. Marry that with Silver Tower's classic storytelling, which had a whole bunch of stories that allow you to make decisions, and your decisions would carry on throughout the storyline itself, again based on its random procedurally generated storyline and procedurally generated map tiles, combining all those things to marry into a 2021's Warhammer Quest Cursed City. And last, but definitely certainly not least, is going to be Core Worlds Nemesis. Now, if you're not familiar with Core Worlds is an extremely fantastically designed deck building and deck deconstruction game, which is actually an evolution of the classic deck building game. Because in Core Worlds, you're trying to build your perfect deck and trying to build it up in the most efficient way possible while getting the powerful cards in, while removing the weak cards by putting them on your world so they don't come back into your deck. While you're working through various different rounds of gameplay, working towards the game named Core Worlds, and you're trying to capture the Core Worlds to get the most victory points. Now, Core Worlds is a really phenomenal game. It's a game that I've been playing for many, many years. I have all the expansions for it, and every time I bring this game out, it's a very enjoyable experience. It is a brutal game. I'm not going to lie, this is definitely a more advanced deck building game. This is one of those games that the first time you're going to play this game, you're going to get soundly trounced. The second time you're going to play it, if you're playing versus experienced players, yep, you're going to get soundly trounced. Because it's one of those games that rewards smart play, smart tactics, and also understanding the evolution of the rounds and the core world. And as the game plays, you need to understand your strategies, how to work with them and use all your strengths and counteract your own personal weaknesses. Because it is a very slightly asymmetrical game. Because at the start of the game, you can draft your deck of cards, or you can use a preset deck of cards, and each one is just a little bit different, having one special hero inside the deck of cards. Now, what Nemesis is doing is it's allowing you to play versus an AI deck of cards, and you're basically going to have a deck of cards, you're going to flip through this, and the AI is going to perform various different actions, which you are going to be racing against that AI to play the game in the classic version of Core Worlds. Now, Core Worlds is a game I definitely enjoy. The Nemesis expansion, my understanding is it's actually part of the Kickstarter for the new Core Worlds worker placement game, which I believe is launching sometime in February. So I don't know if it's going to be a separate purchase that you can be able to get. I really, really hope it is going to be that way, because I don't know if I'm interested in a Core Worlds worker placement game. I kind of like my worker placement games more fantasy, sorry, not Lord of the Rings. Oh my gosh, I almost said Lord of the Rings worker placement. Actually, you know, worker placement games in Lord of the Rings might be kind of cool. What I really meant, though, was Lords of Waterdeep, which is a fantastic worker placement game that I really, really enjoy. So what I'm saying here is I really, really hope, and I don't know if this is actually going to work out, is that you can get Core Worlds Nemesis separate from the Core Worlds worker placement game. Now, I really hope that's the case, and I don't know if it's going to be where you have to get the entire package if I'm going to back the Core Worlds worker placement game. I haven't decided yet. I need to look more into the gameplay and see exactly what's going to be different about this worker placement game versus all the multiple other worker placement games I actually own. So if there's enough of a hook, I might be getting into it, but I'm definitely going to be picking up Core Worlds Nemesis. The ability to play versus an AI, just something that sounds extremely phenomenal and extremely awesome to me. So that's the end of the first Monday show for February 2021. Now, I am looking for some feedback from you. Would you like me to keep these more on the shorter end, or would you like them to be more on the longer end? And by on the longer end means I can start talking about more complete tabletop games. Instead of just talking about board games, maybe start talking about some miniature games, or even start talking about RPGs. Now, some of the ideas I had about adding into the first Monday show would be to talk about tabletop RPGs and maybe do some various things, like talk about tabletop RPG reviews, possibly talk about ways that you can play tabletop RPGs, maybe compare Fantasy Grounds to Roll20 or other ways you can play tabletop RPGs through the internet, or even ways to talk about some of my own homebrew stuff, such as for me, I have a homebrew where I play zero-level campaigns. Now, why do I play zero-level campaigns? Because it's getting really, really boring all the time to start every adventure with, your group of heroes are in a pub. You look over across each other as a very anxious person runs inside the bar and offers you your very first quest. Sorry, it just gets kind of boring for me. So I actually have a homebrew where we start with zero-level characters, and it's really, really cool, and it kind of encompasses the first episode session and actually allows you to do some more personal playing of the game and create your characters right on the spot. So nobody has to come up to the table, spend hours and hours creating their characters before you hit the table, because you're all going to do it together in a really cool experience through a little homebrew that I created a little while ago. Finally, another thing I was thinking about was doing actually some RPG reviews, covering some various different RPGs, maybe some less talked about RPGs, or RPGs that are different from the classic ones that everybody's playing, such as 5th edition and basically Pathfinder. Talking about other games such as maybe Gamma World, talking about games such as Beyond the Wall, talking about various such games such as Paranoia, basically covering games that may be less campaign-based, more lighthearted, more different ways of playing RPGs, or just different ways to enjoy the RPG hobby. That's going to bring this episode of the Monday show for February 2021 to an end. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to get to them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me off-the-shelf board game reviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. I'll definitely get your email as quickly as I can. If you enjoy this video and you enjoy this video series, think about supporting the channel over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/OTSBGR. Just $1 in the tip jar can help me keep the lights on, help me cover costs, and also keep content coming out for you for this channel. If you enjoy this video, if you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching. Next up is an extremely huge announcement. We must enunciate our words. Words are hard.